I've got two movies for you this time, one from Los Angeles and the other one comes from Aotearoa, known to most of the world as New Zealand, and kia ora to any Kiwis watching the video. Both of the movies are from my Arrow video haul. They've been sitting on the coffee table daring me to watch them for a while now. After 200 plus days of lockdown during this pandemic, I thought it was about time I watched them, so I watched them as a therapeutic alternative to doom scrolling and trolling anti-vax politicians on Twitter. So let's start with the lesser film, which is still more interesting than I expected it to be. Once upon a time there was an actress who didn't want to be an actress. George Stevens, the Hollywood director of Shane, Giant, and A Place in the Sun, saw a picture of a young woman and convinced her to audition for a movie he was making, and he ended up giving her the role. So Millie Perkins starred in The Diary of Anne Frank and became known as the Anne Frank Girl. She briefly married Dean Stockwell and then a screenwriter and author called Robert Thom. She did some roles on TV in a couple of 1960s Monty Hellman westerns, and in the mid-1970s her husband Robert Thom became ill with pneumonia and spent a long time in hospital recovering. While there he wrote a screenplay for a guy called Matt Kimber, who mostly made adult films, and he and Millie Perkins cut a deal with Kimber and the production company for her to star in the movie. The couple needed money to pay Tom's medical bills. Kimber also got lucky in the movie with his uncredited cinematographer Dean Cundy, who was near the start of a great and respected career as a director of photography. He did Back to the Future, Big Trouble in Little China, Jurassic Park, Apollo 13 and a number of other films. So The Witch Who Came from the Sea ended up being an interesting combination of horror and art house movie. At the start of the film we see Molly, Millie Perkins' character, playing on a windswept winter beach with her two nephews Tad and Tripoli, telling them stories of their grandfather, whom she tells them was a sea captain. Molly's eyes drift to the bodybuilders working out on the beach, with what we perceive as a lustful gaze, until we drop into Molly's fantasies, where we see them cartoonishly and violently die. She works as a waitress at a seaside bar run by her sometime lover Long John, played by Lonnie Chapman. One of the other waitresses, by the way, is played by one of cinema's great acting teachers, Peggy Fury. Molly is a deeply troubled person. We see her arrange a menage a trois in a motel room with a couple of professional football players, where the kinky games don't go exactly the way the jocks intend. As her life unravels due to alcoholism, drug use, unaddressed issues of childhood sexual abuse which we witness in discreet but confronting flashbacks, and her murderous rampages, which include mutilation of the victims, Molly takes us on a sad journey which gives us one of the more sympathetic killers in 1970s cinema. As she is consistently underestimated and misread by men, the body count mounts. Interestingly, the man who cares about her as a person, Long John, escapes her violence. Molly isn't your usual serial killer in a movie, a dangerous loner. She's a woman with friends and family who suffers from a psychotic break. The movie is surrealistic and weird and confronting, and Perkins gives us a confused, damaged and dangerous protagonist who mixes up TV commercials and reality in her own mind, and it seems to be stuck with a child's simplicity. The Witch Who Came from the Sea doesn't end the way other serial killer movies do. It's a strange but thematically consistent ending which puts the tortured, sad Molly at peace at last. Is this the best movie of its type? No, but it's a weirdly honest movie that tells its story in an unfamiliar way, mixing mythology, horror, and melancholy with a cautionary tale about male entitlement. It surprised me how much I liked this film. Based on Craig Harrison's novel, from which it varies significantly, The Quiet Earth has been called New Zealand's first science fiction movie. If it was indeed New Zealand's first science fiction movie, they did much better than Australia, because our first science fiction film was called Shirley Thompson vs. the Aliens. Zach Hobson, played by Bruno Lawrence, is a scientist who worked on a global enterprise called Project Flashlight, which intended to supply broadcast power worldwide. Something goes wrong with the project, and one morning Zach wakes up and finds he's seemingly the only person in the world. He lives in Hamilton, New Zealand, and after a while he travels north to Auckland, and the first 35 minutes of the movie shows us him wandering the quiet earth. He finds a crashed aircraft with empty seats that have their belts buckled. He goes to the research facility to investigate the event and ends up trapped there until he improvises a bomb to escape. When he moves into a luxury house in Auckland, he quickly goes all but insane. Lawrence gives us a man who was already under stress, a man with a methodical, rational mind, experiencing an unprecedented trauma. And this is Bruno Lawrence's acting tour de force. The disintegration of his character's sanity is shown in a series of vignettes that are both inventive and incredibly sad. Then he sees and meets a young woman called Joanne, played by Alison Rutledge. Together they try to find other people and inevitably sleep together. And while searching Auckland, Zack finds himself at the wrong end of a machine gun held by a New Zealand soldier called Arpy, played by Peter Smith. This sets us up for a romantic triangle not entirely unlike The World, the Flesh and the Devil, but with a more nuanced idea of race. Zack treats Arpy, who is a Māori, as an inferior, even when the group spend the night in a marae, communal sacred place for Māori people. Being dissed by a Pākehā in a marae is severely uncool. The relationship between Zack and Arpy diminishes as Joanne and Arpy grow closer. The trio decide to destroy one of the base stations for the global network to break it down and hopefully return things to normal. The Quiet Earth has a well-earned reputation for being a thoughtful and striking science fiction movie, not only because you see Bruno Lawrence's junk at the start of the film, though props for the gender equity nudity. This is the kind of movie which other YouTube channels make videos explaining the ending of, but I'm not going to. A little mystery and ambiguity isn't going to kill us. And everything in cinema and TV doesn't have to be dissected like a sheep's eye in a science class. The acting in The Quiet Earth is solid, with Peter Smith in his first role maybe being the weak point. The director Jeff Murphy went on to be a valuable second unit director in a number of films, including the Lord of the Rings trilogy for Peter Jackson. He does a great job of giving us an empty, beautiful New Zealand North Island, with precisely chosen locations and cleverly shot scenes on the unpopulated streets of Auckland and Hamilton. If you haven't seen this one for a while, you should see it. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. I'm going to add a little bit on the end here. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to add another bit on the end where I talk about the movies that I've been watching this week. And I've watched a few recent films this week that I thought might be worth checking out, or in one case probably avoiding. So I did see the new Hugh Jackman film Reminiscence. It's a kind of science fiction neo-noir film directed by Lisa Joy, who worked on the Westworld TV series. And Hugh Jackman plays a guy who, in a futuristic Miami, which is flooded because of global warming, can retrieve people's memories and record them and help them find things they've lost, and that's used for legal purposes as well. He's helped by a wartime friend of his, played by Tantaway Newton, who is kind of secretly in love with him, and then he meets a femme fatale, played by Rebecca Ferguson, and the movie is a dog's breakfast. It just doesn't hold together. It's got some really good world building. The futuristic world that they build is on point and really interesting, but they kind of jam a whole bunch of film noir tropes in there willy-nilly. There's a villain played by Cliff Curtis who was kind of interesting. For me, the movie just didn't work, and the ending, which I'm not going to spoil for you, is emotionally dishonest. It just doesn't work. It rewards a behaviour in one of the characters that is truly monstrous. That's kind of a deal breaker for me. I don't recommend that one. I did watch another action film, and this one's got a lot of action in it. I did watch another action film which is much more interesting. A movie called Boss Level, directed by Joe Carnahan, starring Frank Grillo and Mel Gibson. It's kind of like if you crossed Crank with Groundhog Day. This is the best way to say it. Frank Grillo plays an ex-special services soldier who is reliving the same day over and over again. And right from the moment he wakes up, somebody is trying to kill him and sends a whole bunch of weird and wonderful killers to do that. And he's got to kind of work out what's happening and how to stop it. and why the people are killing him and what he needs to do about it. And the interesting thing about this one is it's got a little bit of emotional depth. Frank Grillo is great in action cinema. I think he should be a lot more prominent in action cinema than he is. And if you haven't seen Boss Level, that's great because he does get to kill Mel Gibson several times, and that's something of which I'm immensely in favour of. You should check that one out. If you're in the mood for an action film, Boss Level is something that you should have a go at and just enjoy, because it's just balls to the wall action, imaginatively shot, imaginatively written, and a lot of fun too. It's got humour in there, and the first person narration really works in this particular case. The other thing I'm going to recommend is another action film. I had a run of action films over the weekend, and that is the 1975 Sam Peckinpah movie, The Killer Elite, with James Caan and Robert Duvall in it. It's got Gig Young in it. It's got Arthur Hill, and it's basically about a intelligence agent played by James Caan who gets injured deliberately by his friend George Hansen, played by Robert Duvall, who has turned sides and has kind of gone against the mission that they're on. He has to spend some time in some very, very painful recovery and then go up against Hansen again. Now, this is definitely second-tier Peckinpah, but I like it. I like the fact that I like damaged protagonists who come back from injuries. It's set up really well. The supporting cast is good. It's got Bo Hopkins in it. It's got Burt Young, and it really works. I think they mix up a lot of different kind of Asian martial arts in there. You get some kung fu in there. You get a few ninjas in the climax of it as well. So, you don't want to kind of focus too tightly on some of the action scenes. But it kind of worked for me. It's a movie I've seen a number of times since I first saw it in 1975. And I think it's a good, solid little action flick. It was right at the end of Peckinpah's career, really. But I think that, for me at least, it works. The San Francisco locations work, particularly the location for the climax of the film. And I do like the rapport that James Caan and Robert Duvall have at the start of the film before things go a bit belly up. There's a lot of fun in that. And if you haven't checked that one out, you might well want to. I don't recommend that you see the kind of half remake Killer Elite, the one done not too long ago, filmed a lot in Melbourne here. That one I don't recommend, but the 1975 original I definitely recommend you check out if you're into action cinema. Anyway, that's it for this time around. Look after yourselves. Wear a mask. Stay safe. Do what you have to do. Get a jab. And I'm saying that because they're finding out the damage that COVID does to particularly children, and that's becoming increasingly monstrous. So anyway, look after yourselves. Watch some good movies. Watch some bad movies. Watch a few movies that are kind of on the fringes of things, because sometimes interesting cinema lives in the fringe. And I'll catch you next time.